Hey everyone, it's me, John. Welcome to another episode of Itchy Mysteries. And today we're going to talk about another one that I found on Netflix, at least here in the US. It is called Fight for Justice, David and Me. And it originally reminded me of one that I reviewed a while back called, I think it was called Central Park 5, if I recall correctly. But it was a case where some very young African American boys were kind of, well, I guess the best way to say it is they were forced into giving confessions for crimes that they didn't commit. And unfortunately, this seems to be a trend that continues right through this film as well. This is about a man that was murdered in 1985 and two young African American boys, I think they were both 16 at the time, that were taken to the police station. According to what they say, they were roughed up in their initial interrogation until they basically agreed to say that they had committed this murder, which is horrible to think of. But the movie actually goes forward from that, and it follows one of them primarily. Unfortunately, one of those men dies in jail in 2001, but another is fighting to try to get out of prison from these charges that really don't apply to him. Here's the synopsis on IMDB, and I have a link for this in the description box below. Know that on IMDB it is just called David and Me. I don't know if they added Fight for Justice to it specifically for the Netflix release, but here's a quick synopsis. When troubled teen Ray Klonsky began writing letters to prison inmate David McCallum, both of their lives changed forever. Hundreds of letters later, Ray graduated from university determined to set his wrongly convicted friend free. And that is a pretty good little synopsis about what the case is about, or how the story goes. And it's weird. You know, I always struggle when I'm reviewing these things, feeling like the people that are creating the documentary should be trying to help the situations that they're reviewing. And I know there's some people out there that think, almost from a kind of purist mindset, that a documentarian is someone that is literally just watching what's happening and it's not their job to intercede or intervene. With the types of documentaries that I feature primarily on this show, a lot of them are fighting for justice. So I think that it moves, at least for me personally, it feels like these filmmakers that are capturing these situations and trying to share them with the rest of us should do things within their reasonable power to try to help these situations out. Now, that is a slider, obviously. You can go from doing nothing and, you know, keeping yourself out of the film altogether and just recording those events and putting them together and releasing it, or you could slide it all the way to where you actually become a character in the film, and that is where this film falls firmly in. Ray Klonsky he interjects himself as a central character in this film, which makes sense in one way because part of the narrative is certainly about his friendship with David, who is in prison. However, the backstory to why that friendship is there, I personally felt, I don't think it's even enough to say I felt a little flat. I was a little insulted at it. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. That's what I do on this channel. To compare his troubled teen life, which according to him in this film was he got mad at a friend of his and threw a brick through his window and then got arrested for breaking the window, to a man that is sitting in prison for numerous decades because of a murder that he did not commit. Those two situations just don't match up very well for me. There is a very cool story in Ray's father, who saw that Ray was starting to have some trouble, and Ray's father knew David and asked David to speak to his son, to communicate with him via letters. And there is certainly a very beautiful thing that happens when people try to help each other in that way. And what's really cool about this is you get this very distinct feeling from David that he is just a very giving person. He was happy just to have some letters to read, just to read of someone's life outside of the prison walls, so he could kind of, I guess, live vicariously through other people's experiences. But he really didn't ask for much back. And Ray's, honestly, I feel like Ray's father is really the hero in this whole film. Ray's father essentially puts a team together that tries to get David's case brought back to light and hopefully try to get him out. Now, I'm not going to spoil it for you. I really suggest that you watch this film. Despite my little knock about this weird juxtaposition between Ray's crime and David's crime, which I just don't see the connection there at all. I really wish that they would have just omitted that or kind of glossed over it. They literally could have said, you know, hey, I was starting to get in trouble when I was a kid, and my dad was cool enough to put me in touch with David, and David had all this experience that really helped me avoid that. But instead, they kind of go into that backstory just a little too much for my taste. And it's weird because it doesn't feel like this film has much filler in it. Like, they really could have replaced that time with more about David, more about David's family. And it was a weird way to spend the time for me. So just know that's my slight little knock against it. Other than that, it's a pretty interesting story to see this new team form around David, to see how they conduct further investigations. You're talking, you know, over 24 years after this has occurred, and they're trying to reinvestigate this same case. Some of the frustrations around that. It's also good for me personally to see a private investigator that is likable, someone that you can root for. I really struggle because quite frequently I bump into many cases where I hear about private investigators that are ripping off the families that they're working for. And in this case, they introduce this private investigator that is someone that's really working for the greater good. And it is very cool to see that. So it's really, you know, I usually like looking at films like this because they could be a time capsule of a different place, a different time. This happened in New York in 1985, but they really don't do too much with the old time frame. They didn't license any music for this. They don't even really have a lot of footage from back in those days. They do some cool things with artwork. They have, it almost looks like art that you would see in court, like when the court artists are drawing the judge and the defendant and stuff like that. They have some artwork that portrays the events from the 80s that is pretty interesting, and I like how they integrated that with the film. But outside of that, this largely feels like an MTV documentary almost. Like I really feel almost like an episode of Catfish or something like that. It's young guys trying to take on this greater understanding of this really big problem. It also dedicates a good amount of time to the conversation about confessions. And this is really something, I know I've mentioned this in videos before, but I just have to say it again. They have to do something about this system of false confessions. It's apparently happening very frequently. There are clear indicators that you could look for, which this documentary does a great job of doing. They literally show a punch list when one person is talking about false confessions and how you can look for specific things to see if that confession is false. But even outside of that, you're talking 16-year-old kids. I'm starting to get the feeling that if there's a confession coming in that doesn't have a lawyer or a parental guardian present, those should be automatically bounced, just not even considered. They should be illegal, especially when after you watch this film and hear David's account of what happened in his initial interrogation. It's kind of terrifying in a way. So you'll definitely get a good dose about the false confessions, but there's also a lot more to this film than that. So I like that in one way there's a lot of narrative going on here. There's a lot of different stories that are kind of interweaving. I just have to give it that little knock because Ray's story being such a big part at the beginning of this film really feels out of place compared to the rest of the film, which is actually really, really good. As a matter of fact, I rate this an 8 out of 10. If you have Netflix and you're a fan of this channel and Brain Scratch, I highly, highly recommend you check this film out. I don't think you can go wrong looking into this film. If you're a fan of the Central Park 5 film, this is almost a natural follow-up to that. And I think can give you some more insight into that type of situation. And once again, what was going on in New York back in the 80s and 90s when they were really having some tough time fighting crime. And even outside of that, just the social pressures around these types of crimes and how to handle criminals when they're coming to court for it, which was a really big question that they raise in this. They don't dive into it a whole lot, but I was glad that they kind of touched on that, because it certainly left me scratching my brain just wondering about those types of social pressures. How does that affect your juries? How does it affect your judges? It's really a good question, and I think they could even probably do a follow-up segment on this to go into that further. But that's it. Fight for Justice, David and Me. I wish that they didn't have that and me thing in there. Would have been great if it was just about David. But outside of that, I think there's a lot of very good things happening in this film. I think you will definitely gain something from it, and that's the best kind of documentary in my eyes, when there's lessons to be learned from other people's experience, and this definitely nails that mark. So I'm happy to report that. Hope you guys check it out. If you do, let me know what you think about it in the comments below, and of course keep the suggestions coming. It's because of you guys that I get to see all of these amazing documentaries, and sometimes documentaries that really challenge my thoughts and perceptions, and I really appreciate that. It's part of why I like doing this. Hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you on the next show on the Lord and Arts channel.